This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program.
This is All India Radio. You will now hear comments from the press. The Times of India, in its editorial title, Northeast Protest, says, following a fierce debate in the Lok Sabha, the Citizenship Amendment Bill CAB was passed in the lower house of parliament with a comfortable margin. BJP's members were further shored up by the likes of recent ally-turned rival Shiva Sena and NDA constituent JDU, which has generally sought to keep a distance from the more controversial themes of the BJP's agenda. There is a strong possibility of the legislation going through Rajya Sabha too on Wednesday, but the real test awaits it in the Supreme Court, where it is said to be challenged on the ground that it is at odds with the constitutional provisions, in particular Article 14 and 15, which forbids the state from discrimination on religious and other grounds. Union Home Minister Amit Shah argued that the bill meets the reasonable classification threshold of exceptions. But whether the legislation passes judicial muster remains to be seen. The government will also have to answer why the bill does not cover Tamil refugees from Sri Lanka. Shah said that CAB wasn't against any community and that it would not have been necessary had Congress not accepted partition on the basis of religion. This argument may not hold weight, as India was not created on the basis of religion, only Pakistan was. That in fact is the differentiator between India and Pakistan, and arguably the reason India is much more of a success story than Pakistan is. India is also held in higher regard among the Committee of Modern Nations for that reason. Predictably, CAB's contravention of Assam Accord provisions has led to a severe reaction in the northeast states, with student bodies and indigenous groups agitating. Yesterday saw widespread protests in Assam. Normal life was also affected in parts of Arunachal Pradesh, Tripura and Meghalaya by a Bandh call across the northeast. Even states with the inner line permit system, ILP, Nagaland, Mizoram and Arunachal are apprehensive that the bill will see an influx of outsiders. The Economic Times, in its editorial title, Inequality Drag on Human Development, writes that India ranks 129th among 189 countries in the Human Development Index compiled by the United Nations Development Programme is not a major surprise, nor that it is still ahead of other South Asian countries save Sri Lanka. Yet there are some positive facets that deserve to be noted. One, the difference between India's rank on per capita income and that on human development is negative, meaning that India ranks admittedly among several nations higher on human development than on income. That is to say, somehow India is managing to do better on human development rather than what would be warranted if a one-to-one relationship existed between income and human development. Two, gender bias seems to be coming down, with girls entering schools expected to spend more time there than boys entering schools. The Hindustan Times, in its editorial title, COP25 Deliver on Commitments, writes, despite climate scientists being vocal about the climate crisis, the political response to it has largely been indifferent. On December 3rd, the World Meteorological Organization said the past 10 years were the warmest on record, with a global mean temperature about 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels between January and October 2019. This indicates that the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold will be breached in the 2030s much earlier than expected. The current mitigation pledges are likely to take us to a 3.2 degrees Celsius warming scenario by the end of the century. Inaction has already set off irreversible chain responses to ecosystems such as the marine heat waves and acidification, severe heat waves and changes in the southwest monsoon pattern, among others. The United Nations Climate Change Conference COP25 in Madrid that ends this week has shown no indication of progress on meeting the Paris Agreement goal of keeping the global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius and pursue efforts to keep it under 1.5 degrees Celsius. Developed countries including Australia, Singapore, Japan and United States have said they will not update their nationally determined contributions (NCDs). About 51% of all NDCs have included carbon markets, which is an emission trading mechanism, as one of the means to achieve emission reduction. The Indian Express, in its editorial title, Now You See Russia, writes, Cold War intrigue and the 2020 ban is considered the denouement sports equivalents of the 007s. The righteous athletes from the UK and US must have celebrated oh so briefly the banning of their favorite whipping boys, the Russians. Such has been the frenzied outrage at the dope taint on the sporting superpower of the erstwhile Eastern Bloc that the World Anti-Doping Agency's ruling to purge the 2020 FIFA World Cup and the Olympics of Russian presence started a small hurrah across the Twitter, only for the fine print to collapse the Mexican wave of cheer before it crossed the Atlantic, and it became apparent that the Russians could fetch up anyway if they could prove they were clean on their federations, which ought to have been exactly what happened at all the previous Olympic editions, but WADA can't quite be sure. That in a nutshell means that the Olympics, World Cup and other events might not have Russia, but they certainly will have Russians. Those were the comments from the press.